We will call this board meeting of the Construction Industry Energy Board to order today, the 14th of March, 2023 at 9:32 a.m. I, Chair J. Hansen, deem such to be good and in order. Debbie, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Chair J. Hansen.
Here.
He's representing the Mechanical Board. And Vice Chair Thomas Kyle representing the Electrical and Elevator Board. And he's Present. In the room.
Present.
Thank you. Gary Heikkinen is excused. Eric Sandoval, representing the Building Code Structures Board, connected virtually.
Here.
Thank you. Ryan Richards, representing the Electrical and Elevator Board, and he is present in the room.
Here.
Thank you, Ryan. Blake Shelide, he's an officer of the State Department of Energy, and he's also in the room.
Here.
Thank you. Walter Cottle, he's representing the Mechanical Board. He's connected virtually.
Present.
Thank you. John Camiller, representing the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board. He's connected virtually.
Here.
Thank you. And Matthew Rozelle, representing the State Plumbing Board, connected virtually.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'll just note when he arrives. But we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Debbie. I appreciate that. Looking over the agenda, I'm going to rule that the most current agenda I have in front of me, which I believe is correct. Is that right, Debbie?
Yes, sir.
The most current?
Yes, sir.
Is in order. Moving on to the approval of the draft meeting minutes from our last meeting. Does anybody have any changes that they would like to note for those draft meeting minutes? Anyone? Going once? Twice? Hearing none. I rule the draft meeting minutes for October 18th of 2022 to be final and accepted. We have some dates for the next meetings. Regularly scheduled dates would be June 13th of 2023 and October 17th also of 2023 at 9:30. Same time, same bat channel. I would like to move on to public comment. Pierre, would you please address any public comment that you have before you? I think we just have something from Gary that I'm aware of.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. Pierre Sabat, Policy Analyst for the Division. As of this morning, we hadn't received any requests for public comment to the board. We do have Mr. Heikkinen's written testimony regarding Agenda Item 7, which you can find in your board packets if you would like to read or review it. But we will hold the line open for a few moments in case there's someone else in the meeting that did not sign up for any public comment that would like to provide public comment now. So if you would like to provide general public comment to the board, please identify yourself now. Hearing none, it's back to you, Chair Hansen. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. We've got program updates that we will move into right now. And we have Mr. Heizer on the line to give us our Mechanical and Energy Systems program update. Mark.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. For the record, Mark Heizer with the division, here to give some program updates relative to energy programs. Wanted to items that aren't on the agenda today. Wanted to note that given the new residential code, we will be doing some updates for the technical bulletins that are available for the energy and also for some of the envelope provisions for the residential code. We are looking for some additional bulletins that we find have been very helpful in for both building officials and customers who are asking questions. And we are beginning to review potentially some additional commercial energy bulletins, really looking at frequently asked questions that are coming in from building officials and the public. The division is continuing its participation with both standard 90.1 and the International Energy Conservation Code, looking at following those programs, actively participating to sort of have a good finger on the pulse for what's coming in future code updates. Also, we are continuing our work with the University of Oregon's Energy Studies and Buildings Lab. They're continuing to provide independent review of the code progression as that relates to both meeting targets for future codes and executive orders that are there. There are other pieces that are going to be presented, but if there are any questions, we'd be happy to address any. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Do we have anything from that, from the University of Oregon currently regarding their scope, what they are, how far they have progressed, and outline what they're looking at and what they are actually modeling, if they are truly modeling?
Chair Hansen, Mark Heizer. Yes, the University of Oregon, as you know, we have directives to provide certain levels of equivalence for codes and the progression toward meeting the Executive Order 2004, which was to reduce the energy use of the code relative to our 2006 era codes by reduce that energy use of regulated loads by 60%. And what they're doing is modeling currently the residential code that is just been passed and previous ones to give. We've done internal work, but this is to parallel that to give a secondary look and independent modeling because to show how the progression is proceeding. So they're currently working on the wrapping up the 2021 code, looking at the 2023, and of course, giving a fresh look at the 2000, the sort of the starting point, so we can have verification for the boards and for the reports that we provide to the governor's office on that progression. And we're
excellent. Do we have a timeline when we might see a deliverable from them, or
next meeting? We will have things for the residential energy code with the use of 90.1. We actually have the feds provide an early look at that as well. So probably next board meeting, we'll have the update on, since the 2023 residential code is just completing, we didn't want to have them start the modeling until we had the official, we know what's going to go forward for publication.
okay, excellent. And what institution again was providing that?
This is the University of Oregon, their energy studies in buildings laboratory. So they have energy modeling professionals there. It's a known energy conservation group, do a lot of research relative to progression, energy use in buildings. So they
Excellent.
provide that extra.
Excellent.
Thank you.
I see. I just wanted to try to slip in. I just wanted to hear you say the University of Oregon one more time, Mark. It's the mighty Fighting Ducks. And anyway, Eric, I see you got a hand up.
Yes, Chair Hansen, I'd like to ask Mark a question if you don't mind.
Please.
Mark, I was wondering what the process is, or if there is a process for the program to interface with the upcoming proposed bills. Is the idea that the program waits for any of the bills that are currently on the docket to be approved, and then there's a request to the program to see what kind of impacts they might have, or is there some type of interface that happens ongoing as the bills are reviewed by the legislator?
Through the chair, Mark Heizer with the division. For the most part, I believe our policy analysts do the look at bills, unless we're requested to provide testimony where we haven't. I believe they go through for the fiscal impacts. That's our primary review at this stage, pending testimony and the outcome of bills. So,
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, Chair Hansen.
You are welcome, Eric. Good question, and thank you. It brings me to the observation that it feels a little bit cart before the horse situation. There are a few bills out there, Senate Bill 868.1 and Senate Bill 869.1 that could have some impact from these models. And the Senate Bill 870.1 is a dangerous bill that I would love to have some impact from these models as soon as possible. But cart before the horse, that would be normal for Oregon and our legislative process. Just had to sneak that in. Okay, moving along here in informational reports and updates. Further, I'm sorry, I skipped one. Yes, B, report from Blake Shelide. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, Blake, your last name always throws me for a loop when I read it. Could you give us a report on the Oregon Department of Energy, Blake?
Yeah, thanks, Chair Hansen. This is Blake Shelide with the Oregon Department of Energy. I think you were right on there. So
Thank you.
thanks. So I'm just going to give a relatively quick overview of a lot of the funding sources, federal and state, that are kind of either happening right now or coming down the line for different energy efficiency programs. And hopefully it'll just kind of give everybody here a quick overview of what's available. Certainly there's going to be a lot of information here, and we as an agency and as a state are still kind of awaiting a lot of guidance from the federal government on a lot of these incentive programs, but it's something that we're working on and continuing to coordinate with a lot of the other state energy stakeholders. So here's kind of just a quick overview, but certainly more to come on this beyond today. So I'm in control of my slides here. So, thanks. Oh, there it is. Yeah.
While he's doing that, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to announce that Matthew Roselle entered the room.
Thank you, Debbie, and welcome, Matthew.
Sorry for being late. Computer issues.
We're happy you're here. Okay. So here's just a quick outline of what I'll give an overview of today. First, I'll give a quick overview of the IIJA funding, and then the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, it's federal funding, and then also the Inflation Reduction Act, some background there. There's currently, under the IIJA, there's some energy code-related funding known as the Resilient Efficient Codes Implementation Funding that has some applicability for Oregon with a couple of open applications. Then I'll talk a little bit more about the detail for the larger funding package from the federal government, the Inflation Reduction Act, and then how that kind of relates to a couple specific programs, and then the in-process 2023 ORSC, and its relationship to some of the performance criteria under the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. And then there are some state heat pump incentives that are currently going on right now too. So next slide, please. So just a super quick background. Over the past couple of years, the federal government has passed two important pieces of legislation that provides significant funding for energy efficiency investments. The first of those in 2021 was known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, sometimes also referred to as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And then the second one passed in 2022, and that was the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. And both of those have different amounts of funding for various energy efficiency programs, generally targeted toward kind of climate and energy programs in general, but there are some subsets of that funding that's related to buildings, residential and commercial buildings too, that I think crosses over with a lot of the work that Building Codes Division does and this board does. So next slide, please. And just to give folks a general idea of the magnitude of some of this funding, and this is a chart that an organization called RMI put together, but it just presents the energy and climate related average expenditures of the federal government over, kind of over the years. And you can just see on the far right bar chart, the magnitude of the IRA and the IIJA, almost seeing a triple in the annual spending compared to where we were from 2009 to 2017, especially even considering the ARA funding, which, I think at the time we all thought was a lot of money to invest in energy efficiency. And then here we are about a decade later, and we're seeing even more investments in energy efficiency over the next 5 or so years. Next slide, please. So this section is going to be about kind of the IRA and the rebate. That program structured, there's a variety of energy efficiency funding programs under the IRA. Some are rebates, some are grants, some are tax credits, and I'll just kind of go over those pretty quickly. Next slide, please. So the first one that here I'll just mention here is under the Resilient and Efficient Codes implementation. There's $225 million over 5 years. This is competitive funding that states need to apply for. Every application needs to have a state partner associated with it. And the way that this one's going to work is that they're going to, the plan at least, is to issue over the next 5 years kind of buckets of funding. And there's actually a current opportunity announcement that's out right now that it includes $45 million of available funding. And I'll mention that Oregon right now is a partner on 2 different applications. One of them, our agency is working closely with the Building Codes Division and national partners, a few other states, and then national partners like the ICC, ASHREA, and the National Association of State Energy Officials to develop an application that would provide a lot of additional funding to fill a gap for energy code training for building officials. We're hopeful. We think this is a big need across the country, not just for Oregon, and hopeful that this moves forward. But it's still in the application phase right now, and we plan to submit our final application after having our concept paper approved about a month ago. Hope to submit our final application toward the end of this month for that one. And then the other Oregon application that we're partnering on is an application that would look to further develop and advance building performance standards for existing buildings in Oregon. And that one is more of an Oregon-specific scope and not so much a national scope like the first one. Next slide, please. So this table kind of shows the variety of funding under the Inflation Reduction Act related to buildings. So you can just kind of see the top part of the table has to do with rebates and direct funding and grants, and then the bottom part highlights the available tax incentive programs for residential and commercial buildings. So I'll give just a little bit of overview of each one of these down the line. And this table just shows the bill section, the available funding under each program, a quick description, and then the timeline of, and most of these funding sources generally go across the next decade. Some of them are in place now, like the tax credits and the rebates and grants. We're still waiting on more guidance and more program development by the United States Department of Energy until the states actually start receiving that funding. Next slide, please. So this one is what's known as the Home Energy Performance-based Whole House Rebates. And HOMES is an acronym that stands for Homeowner Managing Energy Savings. But this incentive is generally focused toward existing homes, and there's 2 different pathways. One's based on modeled energy, one's based on measured energy. But generally, if a homeowner is able to meet a certain performance threshold for energy savings, they can get an incentive to help offset some of the cost of those energy measures. And depending on whether they're in the 20 to 34% energy savings or 35% or greater, if they're going the model pathway, will help determine how much money they can get under this program. And then there's different kind of escalators for the incentives for lower and medium income, if you qualify under those metrics. And there's also a measured pathway that based on 15% or greater energy savings, you can get some incentives for that too. So Oregon, we know the allocation amount, but this funding isn't available yet, and will depend on the state developing a program and applying for the funding. But the Oregon allocation for this is about $57 million out of a national application of $4.3 billion. And again, this one is focused on existing homes, so improving existing home building performance. Next slide. And then kind of the counterpart to that one, or an additional program, is what's known as the IV.A. program, the High Efficiency Electric Home Rebates. So whereas the HOMES program was mostly targeted toward general energy efficiency, IV.A. is targeted mostly for electrification projects. And the Oregon allocation for this is about the same, about $57 million. And just to clarify, this one is focused on both new and existing homes. So, you can see the general incentive levels for various pieces of equipment up on this table, but it would feasibly apply for electrification projects that for new construction or replacing a non-electric appliance or a first-time purchase with respect to that appliance. There's some rebate caps associated here, and similar to homes, this program is in development at the United States Department of Energy level, and states have not yet received any of the funding under this, but it's something that we expect to be mostly operational within maybe a year or so, but something that our agency, the Oregon Department of Energy, will be working closely with some of our state agency partners in the U.S. Department of Energy to implement this. And then I'll note too that in addition to the grants and the payments to homeowners to do projects, there's a $500 incentive for installers and contractors to implement some of these projects too. Next slide. So then also, in addition to direct payments to the homeowners under HOMES or IV.A., there will also be $200 million nationally for contractors to install projects that qualify under one of those two programs. So this will also be funding that's administered through our agency when it becomes available from the U.S. Department of Energy. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier the RECI funding that targets building code development and adoption and compliance across the country, and Oregon's got a couple applications under that. Kind of the next phase of that, and if you remember, that was $225 million. The next phase of that under the IRA ups the total incentive funding to $1 billion in total. And the first bucket of that $1 billion, about a third of it, is directed to help states get to the latest and greatest energy codes. So for commercial buildings, that's Standard 90.1 2019, which I think folks know that Oregon's already there, as of a year or two ago. And then on residential buildings, the 2021 IECC is the latest and greatest code there that's referenced to kind of help states get there. So as far as Oregon application for that first bucket of funding, there might be some potential application for like training and compliance, but I think for the most part, that first bucket of funding is not intended for states like Oregon that are already meeting the latest and greatest, meeting or beating the latest or greatest code. That's more to help some of the other states that are a cycle or two or more behind catch up. But then the second bucket of the funding is, and really 2/3 of it, most of it, is to help states meet what is referred to, or the zero energy provisions of the 2021 IECC, or some equivalent stretch code. So still a lot more, I think, guidance and details that need to be worked out at the national level for what that means to qualify for some of that funding, but certainly something that Oregon will continue to look for the potential to utilize in the future as we get more information from the US DOE. Next slide, please. So that kind of covered a lot of the grants and the rebates that it's in the IRA. Now I'll cover some of the tax credits and deductions. Next slide. So this first one is our tax credits for homeowners to implement projects. So if a homeowner puts in energy efficient equipment, they can potentially apply for a tax credit to offset some of those costs. And these payments go directly kind of to the, or not payments, but rather tax credits apply for the homeowners. Next slide, please. Similar to energy efficiency projects, the IRA also kind of expands and extends the credit for clean energy, on-site renewable energy. And just something to note here is that battery storage with a certain capacity is now eligible for a tax credit there too. Next slide. So that was some of the residential tax credits. The IRA extends and expands the deduction for commercial buildings too, what's known as the 179D, energy efficient commercial buildings deduction. It changes some of the incentive structure around a little bit, and then it also updates the reference standard. Depending on the date that the equipment's placed in service, it looks to one of the previous versions of ASHREA 90.1 and kind of updates that over time. So just something to be aware of, that a commercial building owner, if they implement projects that qualify, could get a tax credit to help offset some of those costs. Next slide, please. And then lastly on the tax credits are the tax credits that are available for contractors and builders to build to a certain level of home. And there's different tiers based on whether or not the home meets Energy Star or Zero Energy Ready Home program requirements, where just for example, a single family home could get up to $2,500 if they build to the Energy Star levels, or up to $5,000 if they build to the ZERH level. And you may recognize that ZERH term from the Oregon executive orders, where the 2023 Oregon Residential Specialty Code was directed to meet the equivalent performance of version 1 of the ZERH, which is really ZERH just came out with a version 2, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, that aligns more with the tax credits, but we'll kind of go over all of the ways that the 2023 ORSC will help support a builder in potentially getting pretty close to these tax credits. So next slide, please. So, I think in general, we all know that the ORSC is a very efficient code, and it's still in process, but it's going to, when it comes out, it will provide multiple measures that support progress toward these two national high efficiency standards. Things like efficient envelopes, ducts inside, support for air sealing, efficient HVAC, water heating equipment, and so on, will help get a home even closer to meeting these national standards to potentially help a builder qualify for a tax credit. Next slide. So just a quick overview, and to make folks aware that there's a National Energy Star program, but there's also a specific Oregon and Washington program that would apply for Oregon, just because generally construction in the Northwest in Oregon and Washington and our energy codes and energy efficiency programs have been relatively advanced, I think, compared to the rest of the country. So there's a national, or there's a local regional Energy Star version. And in general, this requirement kind of has two buckets. There's mandatory requirements, and then there's reference design home specifications, and all these need to be met to be able to put a label, an Energy Star label on a home. Next slide, please. So just a quick look at, so if you're building to what's proposed is the 2023 ORSC right now, it'll get you close to Energy Star, but what else would potentially be needed? Things like a little bit more floor insulation, slab edge insulation, actual envelope air sealing and testing down to 3 ACH 50. And just with I did want to note though that a lot of these requirements are, they're not necessarily prescriptive requirements, but they're target specifications that could potentially be traded off under the Energy Star program, but they might need to be made up elsewhere. So just in general, for equivalent performance is what's required under Energy Star. Next slide, please. And then in addition to some of those prescriptive or those target requirements for like actual equipment efficiencies and envelope characteristics, there's other just administrative elements to the Energy Star program, like a design review checklist, actually having an ERI score generated, that are not necessarily technical components to construction, but just the administrative parts of the program that would need to be met by a qualified rater. Next slide. And then, so there's an Energy Star for single family, and there's also an Energy Star multifamily spec, just to make folks aware, with multiple pathways under that: prescriptive path, ERI path, ASHREA path. And because in Oregon, the commercial code generally applies to multifamily buildings too, I wanted to show this table. So Oregon's adopted on the left column ASHREA 90.1 2019. So in order to follow the ASHREA path for Energy Star multifamily, that a multifamily building would need to show 15% improvement over the 90.1 2016 standard. So just to make folks aware that there's a separate pathway for multifamily for Energy Star. Next slide, please. And I provided just a couple links here to the Oregon and Washington program requirements for both single-family homes and multifamily. Next slide. So that covered the $2,500 tax credit. Now the next level up there is the ZRH, Zero Energy Ready Home version 2. And similar to Energy Star, that program has a set of mandatory requirements that need to be met for every home that were to qualify. And then there's these target home specs that generally set the level of performance but can be potentially traded off in an energy model to meet the requirements. So next slide, please. So, kind of similar to how I showed it for the Energy Star, what else might be needed to fill the gap between the 2023 ORSC and actually meeting the ZRH Ready Home? Continuous wall insulation is maybe a bigger one. A little bit more attic insulation, again, slab edge interior insulation. Could we go back one slide? Let's go. Yeah. There we go. Envelope air sealing, this time down to 2 ACH 50 tested. Heat recovery on mechanical ventilation, balanced ventilation with heat recovery. There's some hot water thresholds and limitations for the amount of hot water that's stored in pipes, just to limit that wasted energy. And then there's also components for readiness in the ZRH standard now, for EV ready parking, and then also for electric equipment ready, to kind of reserve a branch circuit for potentially future heat pump water heaters or heat pump space heating if a home is currently heated with gas. So just having the circuits in place in case a future homeowner wanted to put in electric equipment instead. Next slide, please. And then there's also just the general administrative elements too, in addition to the technical construction-based requirements. And there is now an indoor air quality component to the ZRH home too. And then some of the things that are generally outside of energy code regulation, like the appliances, also have a requirement under the ZRH Ready Home. Next slide, please. And then I included a couple links here too for ZRH. Next slide. And then this just is that table that I presented before, just to kind of go back to the summary of all the different funding sources that's available under the IRA as applicable to buildings. Next slide. So the last part of my program will just cover part of my presentation will just give an overview of two related state level incentive programs that are in development right now around heat pump incentives. The first one is the Oregon Community Heat Pump Program. Next slide. So this is all based on a bill, Senate Bill 1536, that passed in 2022, kind of in the wake of some of the heat wave in the heat dome event that happened in 2021. So this provides additional funding for heat pumps, and the first funding stream is $10 million that's appropriated for what's known as the Community Heat Pump Deployment Program. Next slide. And the way this one will be administered, and is actually an open application now, is through regional entities that will distribute the funding, kind of help design the program and distribute the funding across Oregon's various regions. And right now there's an open opportunity announcement that our agencies put out for these regional entities to apply to be that regional distributor. Next slide. And in order to qualify for the incentives, there's a base level of efficiency that would need to be met depending on the type of equipment, and then there's a higher efficiency rating that could be met to get a higher incentive. Next slide. And the incentive levels are up to $5,000 for base level energy efficiency, $7,000 for that higher tier of efficiency, and then potentially $4,000 of other eligible related upgrades, like upgrading the electrical infrastructure or weatherization to support heat pump installation. Next slide. And then the second funding stream, in addition to that $10 million, is another $15 million for the Oregon Rental Home Heat Pump Program. that provides funding for owners of rental units or manufactured dwelling or RV owners who rent a space in a manufactured dwelling or RV park. Next slide, please. And I'll just note that these program rules are not yet final, but as they're kind of proposed right now, it would provide up to $2,000 per dwelling for that baseline efficiency level for a heat pump, plus another $1,000 for the higher efficiency level, and then potentially another $2,000 for LMI owners for eligible dwellings, with a cap of $5,000 or 60% toward the purchase of a heat pump. And then in the manufactured home and primary home RV space, up to $2,000 per dwelling for baseline efficiency, another $2,000 for that higher efficiency level, and then up to $3,000 for LMI income eligible dwellings, and then a cap of $7,000 or 60% of the purchase price of a heat pump. And I did want to note too, you might be thinking, okay, there's a lot of funding that's coming down the line for potential energy efficiency investments, and how are these all going to kind of braid together and interact with each other? There is some limitation for the federal incentives that you can't double dip across, like the homes in the HERA program that I was mentioning. You can't use the same, or different federal fundings for the same project. But there is a potential to kind of take advantage of the various federal funding, state funding, utility program funding, just as long as the total incentive amount isn't greater than the cost of the project. So that'll be something that we work with our utility partners, state utility partners, and the federal government to make sure that a homeowner in Oregon understands all the incentives available to them and can utilize them to the best of their abilities. So next slide, please. And that covers it. I know that was a pretty quick overview of a lot of different programs coming down the line, but hopefully just provides a little bit more information that you can go back and reference or ask more questions in the future. So thanks. And happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Okay. Through the chair, this is Thomas Kyle. The tax credits, are those federal or Oregon?
Those are federal tax credits.
Okay. And then this last slide you were showing for the Oregon system, is that also commercial, or the rental program, was it commercial buildings and homes?
So it's mostly residential, but the rental program could apply for multifamily, rentals as well.
But still residential,
Yes.
Not commercial.
Right.
Thank you. Oh, also, is this slide available somewhere where we could access it?
Yes, I've sent it to Debbie, and I'm happy to have BCD link that to the slide. Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Blake. Moving on to communications. Pierre, would you please introduce this topic of the publication of ASHREA 90.1?
Thank you, Chair Hansen. Pierre Sabah, Policy Analyst for the Division. ASHREA 90.1 2022 is the most recent edition of 90.1. This standard was published on January 25th, 2023. The Division will be reviewing the new standard and returning to the Board to kick off the process of adopting this 90.1 2022 standard at the June 13th, 2023 Board meeting. The Division invites the Board to review the publication prior to this June 13th meeting. The Division can provide an electronic or hard copy file of this 90.1 2022 ASHREA standard. And the Division invites any feedback or discussion regarding this 90.1 2022 standard at the Board meeting on June 13th, 2023. The Division plans to ask the Board to consider adoption of this ASHREA 90.1 2022 with the necessary organ amendments at the Board meeting on October 17th, 2023. And Mark Heizer is here to answer any questions related to this new ASHREA standard. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mark, do you follow up for Blake in this regard? Are you going to delve into that a little deeper? Pierre, I should say. Are there any questions regarding the publication of ASHREA 90.1?
Yes, to the chair, Chair Hansen. This is Eric Sandoval, and I just wanted to make a comment on the work that's being done by the Division to interface with the ASHREA standard 90.1. I know that we have people on board that are in subcommittees and working with that ASHREA publication. I appreciate the hard work that Oregon is doing to help make that a solid publication. And my hope is in reading that through this next year, there'll be an advancement in our energy policy through the code.
Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you, Eric. And I apologize for my distraction. I've got a hot button item going on at the moment.
Yeah, there's no question in that. It's just a statement of congratulations or thank you.
Yep. All right, moving on. If I get this right, communications A, communications B. Now we have a series of executive orders to be spoken to and to better understand. Todd Smith is with us. I think I see you, Todd, sitting at the table of doom. Would you please present some information and background on Executive Order 2302?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Chair Hansen, members of the board. Todd Smith, Policy and Technical Services Manager for the division. Before I get into the executive orders, I did want to just give a quick welcome to our new policy analyst, Pierre Sabah, who you've seen at the table today. He came to us from Lewis and Clark College of Law and private practice. So welcome, Pierre. Yeah, and back to the agenda. I'm going to cover the executive orders and even item E as well, which is our affordable housing white paper that we put out. So as I think everyone's probably aware at this point, the governor, our new governor, has really put affordable housing and housing in general as a priority. And part of that was creating 3 related executive orders. Those executive orders are in your packet if you'd like to read them. Briefly, the first one, 2302, declares a state of emergency due to homelessness in the state. 2303 directs state agencies to prioritize reducing homelessness in our administrative actions. And then Executive Order 2304 created a statewide housing production goal and the Housing Production Advisory Council. That council has now been formed and they had their first meeting on Friday. Last Friday, the division will be helping to support that work as well. So you may be hearing some additional information from us on that topic in the future. And then in kind of explaining how BCD can support local government in the creation of affordable housing, we've included a white paper that we published in your packet as well, if you'd like to read through that and kind of see all the different ways that we can interface and help government, local governments in the creation of affordable housing. So that's all I have, but I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any on any of these topics.
Is there any funding associated with this executive order at this time?
No, not at this time.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much, Todd. And we'll go on to C. Would you please present on Executive Order 2303?
Chair Hansen, yeah, I've kind of covered all the C, D, and E in my overview, but I'm happy to discuss anything else in there if anyone has questions.
I didn't hear any questions.
Okay. So I think I've covered them already, but like I said, so I'm happy to move on unless someone else has additional information they'd like more.
Oh, I didn't think you caught all of A or B, C, and D. You did, huh?
Yeah,
That
That was pretty quick. That was a lot of executive orders for a pretty quick presentation.
Correct. The executive orders, there's not a lot that impacts this board directly. It's just kind of just some general information to keep everyone aware of what the division is up to in that space.
Wow. Previous executive orders have been lengthy and involved. Good for Tina. All right. I appreciate that very much. Moving on to E.
Hey, Chair Hansen, I did discuss the item E as well. That's our white paper that kind of relates to those executive orders.
Okay. Well done. Okay. We have no appeals. no unfinished business. If there are no questions for Todd at the moment, we're moving on to new business.
Chair Hansen, I just have a question on the white paper, if you don't mind. Yeah, so Todd, I was wondering, is the white paper available on the website, the BCD website? Is that how it's being distributed?
Yes, it's in the board packet and is also available on our website.
Just trying to get it out to other members. So yeah, so I could either link the board packet or the website. Yeah,
Correct.
Thank you
Yeah,
very
I
much.
believe it's in our news and updates tab
Thank
on
you.
our website.
Any other questions? Thank you, Todd. Moving on to new business. This board will now review the energy provisions of the 2023 Oregon Residential Specialty Code. Pierre, Mark, and Tony, you guys are up to bat. We'll start with Pierre to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Pierre Sabah, Policy Analyst for the Division. So your board packet includes a document matrix that summarizes the energy provisions of the 2023 Oregon Residential Specialty Code. The Residential Manufactured Structures Board reviewed these provisions last week, actually on March 8th. The division just requests that the board review the energy provisions. This agenda item is informational, no votes required. If you have any questions, Mark is still here and Tony is also here with us. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mark, you want to discuss this?
Thank you, Chair Hansen. Through the board, Mark Heizer with the division to review some of the changes that were made to Chapter 11 of the Residential Code for 2023. First, wanted to give a thanks to the Code Committee members who spent time reviewing this and to the board for their additional feedback and moving this forward. To the administrator for approval in the 2023 code. It's some of the major pieces, if anyone would like to hear about those. It included some cleanup of, if people are familiar with the additional measures, there have been questions in past codes about whether or not we required programmable thermostats for equipment, and for some, it's now moving to the use of a smart thermostat. There are, as noted during Blake's presentation, we have moved from, and something that aligns with Blake's presentation on incentives, the committee removed a very outdated old energy modeling alternative path that would have been difficult to update, and adopted from model code the ERI rating path. And this does align with the Energy Star and DOE Zero Energy Home Incentive Program. So you'd be sort of doing this type of rating of your home to get those funds. So that's now been brought in from model code to have that in our code as a alternative compliance path. Did some updates of efficiency ratings of equipment, because in January of this year, the federal rating methodology changed its name for heat pumps and air conditioning, how they're stated. So the numbers change a little bit, but it's the same efficiency under the old rating system. And again, we're sort of remaining on track for a meeting with the executive orders. We'll be again verifying this with the University of Oregon. I'm available for questions if people have them. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Now to the chair, Jay Hansen. I had a question for Mark. And again, this is just administrative. When I was looking at the attachment, the blue hyperlinks appear to have a need for SharePoint access. Is there another way to get to these elements? Is it available another way?
Catch.
Through the chair, Chair Hansen. I believe there are other methods. I apologize if the links aren't working. We'll work with administrative staff to make sure you can get through to those.
Specifically, the question has to do with the update in the R324.7 solar ready construction and the committee recommended language. Just trying to double check on that and understanding that there was lots of discussions in that for exceptions for the additions, and just trying to figure out if there was an outspringing of that with potentially a file or a form that would help jurisdictional folks to see how that compliance would work. I know that's a lot. Sorry, Mark.
Would
Maybe.
Chief Rocco, would Tony be able to comment on that? Is that a Tony question? Is Tony with us?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm here, Chair Hansen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, Tony Rocco with the division. Thank you for the question, Mr. Sandoval. So I'm not having any issues with the links from the matrix. They just open right up. I'm happy to share my screen and show you what that particular link in the second item on the matrix, R324.7 shows.
That'd be great. Yeah, just
Okay.
the committee recommended language, not the
Yeah.
discussion. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, just give me 1 second here. Okay, hopefully you can see that there.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
So this was clicking that link, and this is just the in-browser PDF here of that language. And so this is walking through all those changes in R324. A lot of this language, again, is just the exact same language we're familiar with from Section 3111 of the OSSC being brought over into the residential code for the structures that the ORSC governs. So then when we get down to the actual quote unquote solar ready portion, showing it to you here. I think it's right. I think it stops right before it.
There it is.
Yep. So right up front there, you're seeing now there are some exceptions,
Right.
which really help flexibility on the application of when the solar ready construction is required. As you know, we've had a solar ready provision in the ORSC for one whole iteration now. And this provides, again, just some design flexibility that's been needed.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
No other questions.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Tony.
Yes, Chair Hansen, this is Thomas Kyle from the Electrical Board. I just had made a request several times that anything that's related to strictly electrical be included under our electrical codes so that it can be in this location too, but just so that they're included to where they're easily found by electrical contractors. These things have to be installed by a licensed professional, and they need to be where we can find them so that we're not buried at the end of a project trying to comply with something that's under the slab.
That is always the case, and it's an excellent point. Same thing applies on the plumbing, the mechanical sections, and I imagine any other section, if it could be also reflected in the code itself, in the individual codes. Can that be facilitated, Tony?
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again, Tony Rocco, for the record. Thank you, Mr. Kyle. Absolutely. We'll work with Chief Anderson, as we always do, to make sure that these requirements are easily discernible for those licensed electricians.
Help us to find the right code.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Do we have any endorsement? Debbie, maybe this question is for you. It doesn't appear on the help sheet, but does this board endorse these recommendations or just informative at this point?
They're just informative, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. I see that we have no announcements.
Chief Chair,
Yep.
Chair Hansen,
I'm sorry.
I
I
apologize.
Didn't
Eric.
see your hand. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I apologize for not asking for this addition into the agenda when you first brought it up to see if there's any corrections. I do have an announcement, if that would be okay to make, even though it's in the,
Please.
okay. So I'm resigning from the Structures Board at the end of May 31st, and so this will be my last meeting here as a part of the Structures Board liaison. And so I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to be here and be participating in the work that's being done through the Building Codes divisions through this board. So thanks again.
Thank you, Eric. I'm sorry to hear that. We've enjoyed having you along for the ride, and your contributions have been very valuable for our efforts. Oh, thank you very much, and good luck to you on whatever board happens to get you. I'm going to move on to adjournment, as I see that we have no announcements. Is there anything else I should be catching, Debbie?
No, sir, that's it.
All right, there being no further business, the March 14th, 2023 Construction Industry Energy Board meeting is adjourned, and I've got it down at, let's just call it 10:30 on the dot. Thanks much.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it very much. Thank you, Eric, again. Take care and have an excellent rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Eric.
You're welcome. Thank you. Talk to you soon.